Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada. Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Nitai Gaur Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaur Hari Bol. Jayam Vishnupad Paramahansa Parvajikacharya Dr. Rashtrata Shri Srimad His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada ki Jai, Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki Jai, Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the devotees on the camera, if there are any. All glories, glories to Sri Sri Guru and Gauranga. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 4, Chapter 27, Attack by Chandavega on the city of King Paranjana. Text number 7. Duhitre Dashotara Shatam. Duhitre Dashotara Satam. Pitrimatra Yashaskarai. Sorry. Pitrimatri Yashaskarihi. Shilaudarya Gunopeta. Shilaudarya Gunopeta. Puranjanya Prajapate. Puranjanya Prajapate. Duhitridashotara Shatam. Pitrimatre Yashashkarihi. Shilaudarya Gunopeta. Puranjanya Prajapate. Duhitre Dashotara Satam. Gunopetaha. Puranjanya Prajapate. Okay. Duhitrihi, daughters. Dasha Uttara, 10 more than. Shatam, 100. Pitri, like the father. Matri, and mother. Yashaskarihi, glorified. Shila, good behavior. Audarya, magnanimity. Guna, good qualities. Upetaha, possessed of. Paranjanyaha, daughters of Paranjana. Prajapate, O Prajapati. Translation, purport by Srila Prabhupada. O Prajapati, King Prachin Barhishat. In this way, King Paranjana also begot 110 daughters. All of these were equally glorified, like the father and mother. Their behavior was gentle, and they possessed magnanimity and other good qualities. Please repeat. O Prajapati, King Prajina Barhishat. In this way, King Paranjana also begot 110 daughters. All of these were equally glorified, like the father and mother. Their behavior was gentle, and they possessed magnanimity and other good qualities. Purport. Children begotten under the rules and regulations of the scriptures generally become as good as the father and mother. But children born illegitimately mainly become Varna Sankara. The Varna Sankara population is irresponsible to the family, community, and even to themselves. Formerly, the Varna Sankara population was checked by the observation of the reformatory method called garbhadhana samskara, a child-begetting religious ceremony. In this verse, we find that although King Puranjana had begotten so many children, they were not varna sankara. All of them were good, well-behaved children, and they had good qualities like their father and mother. Even though we may produce many good children, our desire for sex that is beyond the prescribed method is to be considered sinful. Too much enjoyment of any of the senses, not only sex, results in sinful activities. Therefore, one has to become a swami or goswami at the end of his life. One may beget children up to the age of 50, but after 50, one must stop begetting children and should accept the vanaprastha order. In this way, he must leave home and then become a sannyasi. A sannyasi's title is swami or goswami, which means that he completely refrains from sense enjoyment. One should not accept the sannyas order whimsically. He must be fully confident that he can restrain his desires for sense gratification. King Puranjana's family life was, of course, very happy. As mentioned in these verses, he begot 1,100 sons and 110 daughters. Everyone desires to have more sons than daughters. And since the number of daughters was less than the number of sons, it appears that King Puranjana's family life was very comfortable and pleasing. Om Jnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Didati Swapadantikam Vanchakalpatarubhischa Kripasindhuvya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vas Adi Gora Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Duhitri Dashottara Shatam, Pitri Matri Yashashkarihi, Shilaudarya Guno Petaha, Puranjanya Prajapate, O Prajapati, King Prachinabarhishat. In this way, King Puranjana also begot 110 daughters. All of these were equally glorified, like the father and mother. Their behavior was gentle, and they possessed magnanimity and other good qualities. So it's interesting that we were just hearing in the previous chapter about how King Puranjana lost it and went off on the sinful activity program. And now we're hearing about how all of his children are equally glorified like him with gentle behavior, magnanimity, and other good qualities. And of course, we're also hearing about how King Puranjana is attached to his queen and materialistic religious life. So all of these children, or this process that we're hearing about in the Vedic system of the samskara system, where children are not just children, but from the beginning of life or before the children are even conceived, where there's a program to cultivate their consciousness such that they will have proper character, was supposed to be for mankind a part of society in general, not only for those who are in great families of acharyas or something like that, but for the higher castes, they perform these samskaras. Shudras don't have any samskaras, but the other castes have. So society to function requires this. Not that it's just like it's good for devotees, because we're trying to do something really special and like, nobody else does this kind of thing. But Krishna's system is like, this is what society is supposed to be like. So we can understand the difficulty of our circumstance at this point in time. No one, even the so-called Brahmana communities, is performing these ceremonies. So, Varna Sankara. All of them were good, well-behaved children, and they had good qualities, like their father and mother. So first of all, their father and mother were from the same culture, and they had received the same samskara program. And now they're passing that on to their children. So this is culture. This is actually what culture means. Culture doesn't just mean like, this is the kind of, artwork that's created in a certain part of the world, and this is the kind of music that they have, and this is the kind of food that they make. And, we heard in the pastimes of Prithu Maharaj with Bhumi Devi, that she was providing, as a cow, she took the form of a cow and was being milked, and so many different kinds of sustaining products or food products, or the things that different living entities subsist on, they were taking them from her. And there were all different kinds of living entities. There were those that we would call good living entities, and there were those that we would call not so good, the demons and the demigods and all different kinds of living entities. And some of them were taking, liquors and weird things like that are, like, kind of didn't seem like nice things that they were taking from her. So she can provide whatever anybody wants. So there is culture of all different sorts, quote unquote culture, where people we have developed under the different modes of nature, this kind of art and this kind of music and this kind of cuisine and like all of that, but that doesn't make it something valuable in the terms of our progress in gaining the goal of life. Culture, in the term that we use these days, just means the configuration of the modes of nature that happens to be affecting a certain group of people in a different part of the world. That's what culture basically means. But that's not the culture that we're understanding from Srimad Bhagavatam. Culture means cultivating culture, a system. Actually, when I was in school, I learned that culture means a set of technology that people use to be able to survive, progress in life. So taking that definition, we're trying to attain eternal life. The only culture that's going to provide that technology is Vedic culture. So this is the real idea of culture, even at this level where it's personalities that we're talking about who are not pure devotees of the Lord. Srila Prabhupada discusses that in the previous verses and also this purport, that it's very nice in the religious sense and in the world sense also, because no one's going to, we shouldn't have the false conception that, the world was made so that everyone is an acharya or something like that. There are certainly all different sorts and levels of consciousness that have to be accommodated in this material existence. And therefore, Srila Prabhupada is discussing the varnashrama system, where one takes leave of family life after some time. Now, not even the Shudras and the Vaishyas, the laborer class and the mercantile class, took vanaprastha or sannyas. Well, Srila Prabhupada always says one should take vanaprastha after 50 years and take sannyas. So that's, minimal for us to do that. But in the Vedic system, it's accepted that 2 parts of the society don't even leave family life. The Shudras never even go through brahmacharya. They're just householders. The greatest level of cultural achievement that they attain. And for the Vaishyas, they go to brahmacharya ashram, and then they can go to grihastha ashram. And for the Kshatriyas, they don't take sannyas. Srila Prabhupada, one disciple, had drawn a picture of Yudhishthira Maharaj, I think, when he was leaving home, and he had on sannyas attire. And Srila Prabhupada said, no, Kshatriyas actually don't take sannyas, they take only vanaprastha. And then the Brahmanas can become sannyasis. But still, regardless, there's a system of progression, gradual, although it may be that one has to actually move from caste to even achieve the higher varnas and ashramas. Ashramas specifically, one has to go through a lifetime of religiously being a Vaishya so that he can become a Kshatriya in his next life. And then he can take vanaprastha when he achieves, the age, etc. So it's a culture, it's a technology, it's a system that develops the human being into a detached, ready to go back to Godhead personality. Without that, which is in itself a gradual program in the first place, which direction are things heading? So, Srila Prabhupada is focusing, as I was saying, he tells us one should take vanaprastha and one should take sannyas. Srila Prabhupada is focusing on what's purposeful for our practice, what his followers can do, because this is practical. And this is higher than just remaining in sinful life, or even in just enjoying household life to the end of one's existence. One must stop begetting children and should accept the vanaprastha order. In this way, he must leave home and then become a sannyasi to completely refrain from sense enjoyment in the end. In other words, the goal should be clear from the beginning, that one has to become renounced. At the end of life, Srila Prabhupada says, in other words, one has to progress towards that through family life, if one is in family life, to be able to take that step. And therefore, Srila Prabhupada points out, one should not accept the sannyas order whimsically. He must be fully confident that he can restrain his desires for sense gratification. So, interestingly enough, I don't know the time scale of when Srila Prabhupada was writing this. I have heard in the Lilamrita, read in the Lilamrita, that when Srila Prabhupada was writing, sometimes, maybe many times, a lot of times, however much of his inspiration came from that, I don't know, obviously, but he would write for his disciples in terms of specific things that were happening for them in those times. For instance, one devotee was a sannyasi, and he was a leader, and he was struggling with, following his vows as a sannyasi. And Srila Prabhupada was writing about that to encourage his disciple that one can overcome these things, etc. I don't remember the exact verse or where it was in the Bhagavatam that he was writing it. I think it was the 4th canto, but I can't remember. So sometimes he wrote like this, at least sometimes, specifically addressing issues that his disciples were facing, or things that he knew that the persons that he was dealing with would be facing. And so here he's speaking in a very applicable manner throughout this story of King Puranjana, that one should stop the program of increasing, cultivating household life at the age of 50, and then move on to a renouncing program. Otherwise, we were discussing this when we were covering the first text of this chapter, otherwise, if one doesn't even have that goal in mind, then one isn't thinking, I have to become progressively detached in my household life. Of course, a devotee may be thinking like, if I'm very attached, I'm not going to be able to actually dive into Krishna consciousness. So he wants to understand the philosophy properly and realize it through applying it and become Krishna conscious. But this that Srila Prabhupada is discussing is actually, for my understanding, it makes sense, we can discuss it, is that this is being discussed for a lower level of practice, so that at least we give up the idea that we're going to stay in a comfortable situation for the rest of our lives. Many of Srila Prabhupada's disciples who are very advanced devotees are still not begetting children and all of that when they're older, but they haven't taken sannyas necessarily. Not that if they don't take sannyas before they leave the body that they're not going back to Godhead. It's not a mechanical program that Krishna is asking us to follow. It has to do with what's necessary for our cultivation of consciousness. Like we know Gopi Puranadana Paru, who later in the Bhagavatam we'll see his name actually along with the purports. Considered by so many devotees as such an exalted personality, but he wasn't a sannyasi. So, for example, the idea is that Srila Prabhupada is pushing the message forth that one should not consider this to be the program of life. As King Puranjana was passing away half of his lifespan doing this, Srila Prabhupada was discussing, in this age we don't even live to be 100 years old, maybe 70 or something, and one is still begetting children up to age 60. Begetting doesn't mean like he's fathering new children when he's 60 years old. It means obviously the raising and, taking them to their baseball games and whatever happens with people these days, where your focus is on family life or how to manage the family situation as opposed to how do I progress further in my practical renunciation so that my life becomes simpler and I can focus more on my devotional cultivation. Not that one isn't focusing on that in household life as a devotee, but still, Srila Prabhupada is saying, one must be fully confident that he can restrain his desires for sense gratification. One has to become a Swami or Goswami, completely refraining from sense enjoyment. That's the standard that he wants us to reach. So regardless of nice family life, he's saying you should still have the understanding. Take vanaprastha, take sannyas. At least that should be your goal, that I can achieve that. If you can't achieve sannyas, that means, according to what Srila Prabhupada is saying, is that you're not confident that you can restrain your desires for sense gratification, which is not a very good position for us to be in as devotees. Right? We're getting ready to go back to Godhead at the end of life, and I'm not very confident that I can restrain my desires for sense gratification. It's not good. So Srila Prabhupada is saying, do this, but don't do it prematurely. Don't do it immaturely. Don't do it whimsically. Do it progressively. So if you're taking household ashram, then you should do it in such a way that you will be able to take vanaprastha and sannyas. Not that you forget and then 50 years old, wow, I haven't been practicing Krishna consciousness very nicely. Woe is me. You know? Bhaktivinoda Thakur's songs, we hear, I've wasted my life kind of message. You know, don't fall into that category. That's what Srila Prabhupada is pushing forward here. And then again, the message that I heard for those in Srila Prabhupada's movement or his followers is don't accept sannyas whimsically. Be fully confident that you can restrain your desires for sense gratification. Be honest where you are and follow the program. If you're not there, follow the program so that you can get there. Be sincere and strive for that level of renunciation by practice of Krishna consciousness, as we were also hearing yesterday. Renunciation is a product of our Krishna consciousness. So the way that we apply ourselves to becoming more renounced is that we apply ourselves to becoming more and more satisfied in our position as Krishna's servants. That's how we cultivate renunciation. Because renunciation just means I don't desire to enjoy things independently of Krishna. Renunciation doesn't mean I don't have anything. I mean, for certain ashrams it does. But in essence, renunciation doesn't mean I don't have anything. Renunciation means that from within, my desire is to use whatever I have in Krishna's service. So that is the cultivation. And if one is not ready for sannyas, then whatever ashram he happens to be in, he should use that ashram to cultivate that consciousness that my desire is to use whatever I have for Krishna's service. So, Srila Prabhupada ends the purport with kind of a statement out of the blue, it could seem, I guess, that King Puranjana's family life was very comfortable and pleasing because everyone desires to have more sons than daughters. The focus, I'm understanding, is not that, it's important to have more sons than daughters. The focus is that King Puranjana's family life was very comfortable and pleasing. In other words, a religious family life has that aspect, as opposed to just a sinful family life. Although King Puranjana has his issues, still, he's showing by his own life that there is a significant benefit to having a religious family life, if nothing higher than that. So, guess I will stop there. Any comments or questions? Hare Krishna. It's the video people.
I was wondering if you could say something about what happens in a family situation where, like, maybe the husband or the wife, one of the others, is more interested in, like, following the Vedic process, becoming gradually detached and then taking vanaprastha, but the other party may not be so interested. So how does the householder go about building support at the home base to do that program?
Fortunately, I don't have that problem, but the same way that we inspire anyone else is how I would like to answer the question. If we become good followers, then that's the best way to inspire others to become good followers. So we focus on our relationship in the Vedic system, the way that I've been taught is that the husband is supposed to be very faithful to the spiritual master, and the wife is supposed to be very faithful to the husband, and the children are cared for by the mother, and in that way, Krishna's direction is flowing through the family system. That's the Vedic program. Of course, nowadays, we all meet the spiritual master and everything, men and women and children and whatever. So, but, which is fine, we're in Varna Sankara thing, so everybody has to get uplifted somehow. But that's the Vedic program. And so following that model, the husband is very faithful to the spiritual master. He's actually developing those qualities. Then the wife can be inspired to follow him. That's the best that we can do, regardless. When we're trying to inspire anybody to take to Krishna consciousness. I think that was your question. I can go in another direction, but that answers your part of it, I think. Dr. Glenn Prabhu.
Krishna Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Prabhu.
In Prabhupada's own life experience, the little I've heard didn't seem that it was completely harmonious between himself and his wife. But he did what he had to do.
Yeah. That's the conclusion.
Just a simple question, but Swami and Sannyasa, are there any behavioral differences in terms of Swami and Sannyasa?
I'm sure the Prabhupada is saying a sannyasi's title is Swami or Goswami. Title. They're synonymous. Supposed to be. Yes, Prabhu. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Prabhu. I'm looking for some, insight, clarification on this point that Prabhupada is giving what seems like a general instruction that we should all strive for this position of Goswami, even if it's just like an interior cultivation. But then also, you were mentioning for Shudras and Vaishyas, there's not really, I don't know if you could say an expectation or something like that for those persons to go into like the more renounced orders of life. So given that most of Kali Yuga, most of us are in that position, we're not Brahmanas, we're not even Kshatriyas usually.
Mm-hmm.
So what to do about that?
Chanting nicely. This is from the 4th canto, chapter 23. Maharaj Prithu is going back home. Text 32. If one hears of the characteristics of Prithu Maharaj and is a Brahmana, he becomes perfectly qualified with Brahminical powers. If he's a Kshatriya, he becomes a king of the world. If he's a Vaishya, he becomes a master of other Vaishyas and many animals. And if he's a Shudra, he becomes the topmost devotee. Srila Prabhupada discusses if he's a Shudra, if one hears of the characteristics of Prithu Maharaj, then if he's a Brahmana, this, Kshatriya, that, etc. Srila Prabhupada goes through the purport, I'm not going to read the whole thing, discussing the importance of the process of hearing and chanting. The process of devotional service, especially hearing and chanting, is so powerful that it can bring a person to the perfectional stage. But whether one is a Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, or Shudra, he can attain perfection simply by hearing and chanting. To take birth in the family of Brahmana is not the ultimate finishing touch. Similarly, taking birth in a royal family is not the all in all. A person who is born in a Shudra family can become greater than a Brahmana simply by accepting devotional service and giving oral reception to the pastimes of the Lord and his devotees. So part of, related to what I was saying, is that our process of renunciation is cultivation of our Krishna consciousness, as was stated also yesterday. Vasudeva Bhagavati Bhakti Yoga Prayojitaha Janayati Ashu Vairagyam. That if you're seriously engaged in devotional service, the natural outcome will be detachment. So we are meant to become Goswamis by that process of hearing and chanting and internalizing those messages. Like you said, it's an internal cultivation. Shrinvanti Gayanti Grananti Sadhava. Or taking the messages that we understand to be pure and internalizing them in our life, whatever it is. There's other verses that discuss the same thing, but I don't want to go on and on about the same point. It's just the essence is to become a devotee. So whatever your position is, then you use that as a devotee, and that will cultivate that detachment. One should understand that my life is not meant to be comfortable and full of sense gratification forever. Therefore, vanaprastha, sannyas, become a Goswami. But if one understands that and one is practicing like that, it's not the orders of vanaprastha and sannyasa are maybe helpful, but that's not the essence of what one is striving for. Is that helpful? Okay. And chant Hare Krishna. Yes.
Detachment. In striving for the behavior of sannyas or of Goswami, does detachment, is that an internal attitude, or is it is it dissociation? In other words, from the family situation, does it mean that one is detached, that one is not emotionally entangled, or does it mean that one discontinues their relationship?
It can mean either. It just depends on the one's circumstance, according to what Srila Prabhupada discusses in Bhagavad Gita. Specifically, that if household life is conducive to developing Krishna consciousness, then one doesn't need to take sannyas. He says that specifically. And here he's saying one should leave home and become a vanaprastha and a sannyasi. So therefore, the first thing that I was thinking, and I said that, and I didn't maybe go into it so much, is that this is specific statement about one should take vanaprastha and sannyas can be taken two ways. One, the way that I was mostly discussing, is in principle we should understand that I should not be attached to family life or the idea that I'm going to enjoy family life. I want to become Krishna conscious. The other is, from a practical standpoint, people are going to be attached to household life, so they should follow up their household life in such a way that they're going to be able to take vanaprastha and sannyas later on. So it regulates them to not fall into the deep, dark well of, material enjoyment under the name of religion. So it's not either one. For sure that Prabhupada, it was that he left his home. But that was at an age anyway when it was, accepted culturally for him specifically. But but it's not either one. I want to remember a part of your question so that I don't leave it hanging in the air. Does it mean to sever those relationships? I think you said specifically. That depends on the strength of the person in question, as far as I can understand. Because well, that's not a complete answer. If one is cultivating his household life properly, he should be able to take vanaprastha and sannyas without the idea of rejecting his family or something like that in a negative sense. But severing the relationships means my consciousness is no longer in that situation. It's over here. And I'm focusing on my relationship with Krishna now. So it's not a severing in the sense of like that kind of thing. It's a severing of my focus is now turned to my mission here. Like something that first came to mind is that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, we hear this description about him that a devotee can be, or the Lord in this case, but he can be as soft as a rose or as hard as a thunderbolt because he's not attached actually. So he was dealing with his devotees and they all didn't want him to leave, but he had a mission to go on this tour of South India preaching the Sankirtan movement. So he spent several days, 10 or something like that, with Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya. I can't remember how many, and entertaining his desire to serve the Lord. And then he was just gone and didn't look back again, walking away with his devotees standing there. Now, is it that the Lord severed his relationship with his devotees? You can say yes, or you can say no, because the Lord doesn't ever sever his relationship with his devotees. So, similarly, we're not Krishna, and our family's not our devotees, but relationships on a spiritual level, we're not meant to forget about anything or anyone. We're supposed to understand things from a Krishna conscious perspective. So the severance is, that's no longer my ashram. I'm doing something else now. That is taken care of. I'm taking care of this. No longer is my mind going to those things. It's not a aversion or something like that, because that means that one isn't actually properly prepared to take sannyas, life, because those desires will come back again. Srila Prabhupada has discussed. Sometimes people take vanaprastha and then they go back they take some other wife later on to enjoy sex life again. So that's not the program. Within all of what I said, hopefully the essence can be distilled. If not, I can try to clarify further.
Thank you, Brahma.
Okay, it's a very personal cultivation, the whole thing. There's no mechanical aspect to it, except that one is moving from one stage of life to the next. But the internal has to be there too, or else you won't be able to maintain the next ashram. To put it succinctly, perhaps. Anga.
His wife was also, I guess, not very useful, and so he had a whole kingdom also to take care of.
Yeah.
And he just left that and didn't have any connection with the family again. Even the Pandavas, after Krishna disappeared from the planet, they also all just started leaving. And then Draupadi and Kunti were like, well, they all checked out. I guess I should check out also. And we see that there was kind of a severance there in that particular relationship. And Sati, she was so disappointed with her father, she just committed suicide. And kind of, that's a real deep severance, nobody. So we see that although the severance is also like a non-investment, as you were explaining it, but in some cases it's just an actual cut, because inability to fulfill the duty for those persons as far as augmenting their Krishna consciousness, and also they'll create obstacles for your own self-realization. So it seems was the operative principle, because and then you have other examples like Mahaprabhu telling Raghunath Bhatt to go back and take care of his family, but he said, don't get married, but go and take care of your elderly parents. But the reason is because they were devotees, and Prabhupada says otherwise Mahaprabhu would not have instructed him like that. And with Raghunath Das also, he told him, go back and pretend like you're materialist externally, but internally, as you were explaining, not invested. But then later on, Mahaprabhu made a whole plan for him to get out of that situation.
Right.
So what is the operative principle? Because I'm giving very heavy contrast here.
Yeah. The personalities you're talking about, I think that it's perfectly in line. King Anga, I mean, if we understand his consciousness, then we'll be able to understand he wasn't just materially severing himself, but he actually was disappointed that I can't, serve the personality of Godhead through my family, so there's nothing I can do. This is the arrangement of the Lord. I have to just accept it and let it go. So his consciousness was like that. Or similarly, some other personalities, whereas, or Srila Prabhupada, or Ramanujacharya, or whatever, those personalities are obviously like up there. So what's the operative principle? That's why I can't give an answer like this is what you're supposed to do, because it's a very personal thing. It has to do with your own Krishna consciousness, which is not a simple thing to understand. Even Ramanujacharya didn't leave his wife right away after she had already insulted his spiritual master. And he's Ramanujacharya. So, these things aren't so easily determined. One has to see, like Srila Prabhupada also, she traded his Bhagavatam for some tea and biscuits or something, I mean, it's like my life's aspiration, you're throwing it out the door. This is not just my life's aspiration, it's the instruction of the acharyas, and you're not interested in being a part of that, so what can I do after so much time of trying? So I think the operative principle is if it works for you, and behind that is it's going to require a lot of personal introspection and consultation with Guru Sadhu Shastra, etc., to be able to understand where I'm at and what's this situation really going to do for me, and what should I do to move forward. It's not a simple formula, in other words, or not a simple thought process. Those are my thoughts in response to that. Although sometimes the severance is very abrupt, just like Srila Prabhupada. Anything else anybody wanted to add, or? Yes, Prabhu.
I was just having a question. Maybe if you'd wanted to share anything on your side, how in today's society, because of the nature of the culture, so anti-spiritually progressive, how when having interactions and based on one's ashram, there be, well, not necessarily based on the ashram, but there may be more. So I was just curious, if one is having a lot of association in that atmosphere, how that proper cultural, Vedic perspective can be maintained. And really I have so much admiration for people working in that society on it, because it takes a lot of strength to maintain. So if you want to share anything, or just in general, the principle, because it totally seems it's really two different worlds, and
yeah. I haven't gotten this advice specifically on my job, but I've gotten this advice in relation to dealing with family in a larger context of going to family gatherings and things like that. So the same can apply, at least. That, and this is something I specifically thought of when I was discussing this purport, is that we're meant to realize the messages, to hear them, to chant them, and to apply what we've heard. So as we're seeing things, we can confirm what we've heard in reality, and not to put it in super dramatic words because I'm not, manifesting something wonderful like that maybe, but to some extent we're living with Krishna's message or with Krishna's intelligence. I heard it put that way in a class I heard last night, that the Bhagavad Gita is Krishna's intelligence. He's spelling out for us, this is how you can see how to make decisions about the material world. So if we're living with that understanding that he's giving, then we're actually deepening our conviction about those things, as opposed to just being there and seeing all of it and absorbing it or something. That's one possible scenario, and then one can become covered by that. But instead, one is projecting the messages of Bhagavad Gita onto that scenario, and then one is seeing in Krishna consciousness, or at least that's the cultivation. And another obvious thing is, as we've been advised, don't develop loving relationships with these people, because you're putting your heart in a dangerous place. So we have cordial interactions, but we don't invest our heart or consciousness in their lives and their problems and those kinds of things. Because the only solution to anybody's problem is Krishna consciousness, and they're not interested in that. So we're not interested in solving their problems in the way that they are interested in solving them, etc. We're not interested in their details of their personal lives. We're interested in being kind-hearted, gentle persons in their midst, and trying to be devotees so that they will be perhaps inspired to look towards God for the solution to their issues, etc. I think that's what I or you can say that one is simply working for the pleasure of spiritual master and Krishna. Both of those things are there, because we're not pure devotees and we're not Krishna conscious, so we're trying to cultivate the relationship with the person for whom we are working, and we're trying to cultivate the vision that allows us to see properly Krishna in all aspects. Those things can protect us. Finally, the association of devotees, because if we have relationships with devotees, then we're not going to be hankering after materialistic relationships so much. So if we have a nice devotee association, then even persons who have some inclination like that for material association can be more satisfied. Those are some thoughts. Thank you for your questions. Okay, it's 8:30. Thank you all very much. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Okay. We'll still have Ishtagoshti, although Nityananda Pran Prabhu is not there. I don't know. Radharana Prabhu is there, I think. And for pujaris, 9 to 10, clean up on the altar. And for those who are not going on the altar, there's a temple room cleanup, 11 to 1. Yeah, like some different activities are going to be there. I don't know the details. Yeah. If I missed something, please let me know. I forgot all the announcements.